So we're very privileged tonight to have Karin. She's going to speak to us about Enneagrams. Am I saying okay?
Absolutely, that's great.
And Karin's a student of life, a student of personality, a student of spirit. What I said about the group, I had written here, who am I, why do I do the things I do? And we could just as well ask these questions of our group as of us. And we will come next week, I said.
And thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Way more people than I expected. So that's a really great thing and a slightly nerve-wracking thing. So, you know, they always say when you start a speech that you need an icebreaker. So I'm curious, does anyone have a good icebreaker? A joke that they can share to break my ice? No? Seriously, does anyone have a joke or a riddle?
I have a joke. I heard it the other night at the gospel thing, and it was really quite funny. Our minister's name is Phil, right? So the fellow, Bruce Feltham, he sort of hosts the gospel things, and he always is picking on Phil. Anyway, he says, Phil and Tevis, that's his wife, were on a cruise they went down south. And they were in a terrible storm, and the captain called everybody and said, hey, everybody has to get up on deck right now. So everybody went up on deck, and they were sinking. Mm-hmm. And the captain said, does anybody here know how to pray? And Phil says, I do, I can pray. And the captain says, good, we're one life jacket short. He says, you pray.
That's perfect. That's perfect, thank you. Just what we needed. So tonight I want to share some insights around the Enneagram. And so the way I'm going to kind of work through this is I'm going to tell you a bunch of information. You're probably going to be completely overloaded with information by the end of the night because there's lots to take in. And so I'm going to share some things around the Enneagram and how it works and aspects of it. And then we're going to take a little break where I'm going to get you, if you haven't already figured out what your Enneagram type is, where you can type yourself, potentially. And sometimes typing yourself takes more than just doing one quiz or one test. It can take longer than that. Sometimes it can be hard to determine whether you're one type or another type. Some types can have similar patterns. So we'll take like 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about the different types, okay? So that we can kind of talk about it in terms that are more real to us. So I got connected with the Enneagram in about 2007. I was taking coach training, and my coach basically, I think she knew what type I was. And so in coaching, you're not supposed to tell people the answers, so you have to go figure it out. So she told me to go get this book around the Enneagram called The Essential Enneagram. It's very thin, to the point, and when I read it, I was mortified. Okay, when I saw my type, I thought, that is not the type I want to be. So, and the great thing about the Enneagram is it talks about both your strengths and the things that can be challenging and hard in your life. And it's so for some people, and maybe this is more than me, it's hard because you look at those things, and those are things that for me I was stuffing down, and I didn't really want to. I had been acting like I didn't really want to see, or I didn't know. Some of them I didn't know, and I really didn't want to know, and it all kind of came at me fast. And then after a few years, it took me a little while, and I kind of kept coming back to it, and I really realized how deep and rich the tool was. And my daughter was hitting her teens. So I was thinking, this is perfect. I had been looking at my coaching and where's my coaching going to go, and I thought, I want to work with kids and help kids discover their strengths. So the Enneagram came out along with another strengths tool from Gallup. And I thought, who better to start kind of experimenting on than my daughter? So I got my daughter to do her strengths, and that really kind of helped me reposition the way I saw her, rather than through my lens, my glasses, my viewpoint. I thought, oh, she's her own person, and she's not like me, and she's not like her dad. And sort of as things progressed, I introduced the Enneagram to her. And I started with the good stuff because I didn't want to overwhelm her. But what was really great is as her mom, I could see the patterns, right? I could see where I needed to let go. I could see where she was going and what she was doing and her interests. And at 15, my daughter decided she wanted to start a blog. And her dad is an IT guy, and he was nervous about the security of it. And so we decided, it would be good for her. But knowing her personality, too, I could see that my daughter is a 3, an achiever, that her personality is more inclined to entrepreneurship. So she started this blog and started then designing blogs for other people around the world. And this kind of started to snowball. And I had moments where my personality got in the way because I had rules and ideas about how my kids should be. And my daughter should have a job and she shouldn't be doing all these things. So in having tools for me to look at, for me to see myself, for me to see her, and then my husband too. I got to tell you, I've been married for 30 years, and at about year 20, I didn't know, I knew my husband, I love my husband, but there are lots of things I didn't get about him either. So having another way to look at this, and he did his Enneagram, and the Enneagram in the past has been handed down orally. It was handed down, it's an ancient tool, was handed down orally, one person at a time, and it wasn't actually meant to be, back then, transferred to a group of people because they didn't want people to use information against each other. But in my case, it was really helpful to learn things about my husband that I didn't really get. So my husband is a 5, and the 5s are very much introverts. They need lots of time by themselves, and he will disappear. And it's like, where's my husband? And luckily, I don't need a lot of time either. But it was really kind of fascinating. And then when we went on vacation, I could never really understand why my husband would get all, we call him Safety Bob. His name's Rob. And he would get all very safety conscious where I just want to have fun. And he does not handle that very well because I want to talk to people and so he wants to contain me, I want freedom. And the two didn't work. So we have now been married for 30 years, and we don't go on vacation together. Just kidding. I mean, we do. We just don't. The last big vacation I did, I went with my daughter, because it works better. But knowing those things, it allowed him to be honest and me to be honest about what we actually needed, which I really appreciated. So what I want to do now is, share really why I love this tool is because I think the more we know about ourselves, the more, and I'm not talking just the good stuff, as you hear, the good and the good, the bad, the ugly, helps us really know ourselves and love who we are, and then be who we are. Because I think really, and I shared this in my, if you read anything about me before coming, right, for me, I think the world can really benefit from us being able to see each other for who we are and not have to change it. And realize that the way I see is not the way anyone else sees. And each type has a particular way of being and is motivated by a particular aspect of being. And each type is identified by the motivation, not by behaviors. And the motivation stays with us our lifetime, and behaviors can change based on a couple of things, and I'll get into those. So I think, for our families, for our workplaces, for our relationships with ourselves, knowing more about ourselves is a good thing. Mm-hmm. I also want to recognize that this is not the only tool that's out there. There are lots of great tools. I just found this one to be able to share. For me, what happens to me when I'm in my sort of pattern, and what happens when I'm in a stressed place, and what happens to me when I'm in a good place. And so I can recognize those patterns, and so can other people, and that for me is really helpful. And then it's a very layered system, so it's not, what I share with you tonight will be basically the tip of the iceberg. I've been looking at this tool for years, and every time I get into it, I learn something new. So it's not static. And then people who are really interested in studying people and are learning about the Enneagram and have been teaching the Enneagram, they bring more to it too. Okay? So, Ennea means 9, and gram means diagram, basically. That it's a Greek word. And so ultimately, and I hope you can all see this, I like that the younger people are at the back because they have better eyes than... So as you see, there are 9 types, and when you get into the Enneagram, you'll see that the 9 types are identified. Some people will use different words for the types, but they basically mean the same thing. So if we look at the 9 types and you look at this diagram, basically what happens is, if you look at, say, the mediator, who's the number 9, the 9 has 2 sides to it that are called wings, and so we're never purely one type. We tend to gravitate towards, either side, and some people claim that over time it will actually kind of develop as we move into acceptance and we kind of become older, we'll take on both types. We can move between them. And ultimately, the Enneagram, we have all of the parts in us, okay? We just have one pattern that we used more often than others. And as we go through this, I'll share motivation, childhood messages that, that each of us may have taken on that kind of help create some of these patterns. So if we go back to the wings, so we have either wing, and each wing is going to impact that personality's patterning a little bit, okay? So, and then from there, the 9 will go into, you see the lines that come off of it? So when the 9 is in a good place, so secure, it goes to 3, okay? So what looks like a 9, the 9 has particular patterns, but when it is feeling good and feels secure in itself, then you'll see it move into 3 and take on more of the 3 patterns. The beautiful part about the Enneagram, like us, is it has varying degrees of integration. So we can be healthy as a 9, or we can be unhealthy as a 9. And there's basically 9 stages of integration according to some of the books. And I brought a bunch of books you're welcome to look at. And they can be at the top where there's liberation to clearly dysfunctional, some people call them psychopathic type tendencies at the very bottom, where you're clearly dysfunctional and your pattern will make those dysfunctions even worse. So that mediator type moves into 3 and security, and they move into 6 when they're stressed. And so when we're aware of that, we can also move into the healthy or unhealthy parts of the stress or secure types, which is also really fascinating to me. Does anyone care where this came from? Okay, great. So where it came from. So it's an ancient tool, and so they're claiming it's an ancient tool because they're finding in, say, Sufism and Christianity, they are finding the same sort of pattern, okay, the same sort of diagram. But as far as having it mapped out like this, what happened was in the 60s, a fellow by the name, there's 3 key people that were influential and sort of bringing this to us and then having other people expand upon it. So one of the individuals was George Gurdjieff, who took the patterns, and he's a Russian mystic, and so he embodied this. So he created dance moves and worked with the types around that. And then there was a fellow named Oscar Chazo, and he developed a school, and so he started to develop that and worked with a fellow named Claudio Naranjo. And Claudio Naranjo was a Chilean psychiatrist. And so between the two of them, they started to develop this tool, and people started to want to study with them. And some of the people that studied with them are like Russ Hudson, who wrote this book, and Helen Palmer. I have books. Some of the original Enneagram teachers. And so since then, people have taken it on, they love the tool, and they keep developing it further and further. So it's not a male or female system, so the tendencies generally are the same. No type is better or worse, although you can hear me saying, I wanted to be another type, did not want to be the type I am. And some people get a little nervous when they see personality typing. They think it's putting them in a box, but really the way I see it, and a lot of people see it, is that once you know the box you're in, you can come out of the box. So really we box ourselves in without really knowing that we're in a box, by following the tendencies and patterns that we're unaware of. Okay, so as I shared, the key motivator is your motivation. That's what drives each personality type. And what else do I want to tell you? With each type too, there's a passion. So it's kind of like the 7 deadly sins. And those are basically some of the ways that we can see how we get out of balance. So they're things that are in our face, and sometimes we're aware of them and sometimes we're not. And I'll share more of those as we go along. And then there's also the virtue. So once we learn more about our type and we soften into our type and we have the awareness, we move more into the virtuous side of our tendencies, which is really great. Then the last thing I want to tell you about is there may be things that I'm missing. So here on this diagram, you're going to see that I have 3 triads. Okay, so the first triad is in green, and it's the gut-body triad. And everyone in this triad is dealing with anger stuff around anger. Okay, some of them may not look like it, but they deal with anger on a regular basis, and some of them visibly show it. So the 8 externalizes it. Who's the challenger? It makes sense that they externalize it. The perfectionist internalizes it, and what the perfectionist does is that type they're very focused on being good and doing things well and right, and the way they project themselves is they want to look very together, and they don't want to offend anyone. So when they make a mistake, they internalize it. And so there's a sense of effectively anger that goes inward until they can't contain it anymore. And then sometimes that type will blow up out of the blue. Something will trigger some small thing and people will go, what happened? You didn't, like, it makes no sense that you're that mad. And they will build little resentments that they can no longer retain over time. And then the 9, they forget that they're mad. Right? So the 9 type is a really, and they're all beautiful types. The 9 type does not like conflict. So they're called the mediator for a reason, because they can see both sides of pretty much every situation. Makes it hard for them to decide, and when there's conflict, they want nothing to do with it. They will remove themselves from conflict because they want to stay in peace. They want to stay in peace with their relationships. They don't want to fragment the relationships with anyone, and they're afraid of their anger, so they will remove themselves from situations, and they will wait until everything subsides. They hope by avoiding it, it'll get fixed. So they forget about it. But you'll know, anyone who knows a 9 will know that they're angry because they are stubborn, but they don't think the stubborn is angry, and they're passive aggressive. And they may not know that either. I've talked to some 9s, and I will say to them, do you ever get angry? And most of the time they'll tell me no. They never get angry. But I can feel their anger. I grew up with a 9. So then on this side, we've got, in the red, we've got the heart feeling triad, where we have the 2, which is the giver, the helper. And the 2 is the kind of personality type that loves everyone. When you are around a 2, you'll know you're around a 2. You feel like the sun you are being surrounded by sun and love. They seem to get you, and they know how to read people's needs better than in my experience, better than I know my needs. They know me better in some ways, but they don't know their own needs. So they feel the feelings of others, but they don't feel their own feelings. They don't know what they're feeling or what they need, and they have a pattern around that. So they externalize their feelings, and there's a kind of sense of loving how much they're able to love you, but they're forgetting about themselves. And then the three, the achiever, my daughter, and I can see this plain as day, and she knows this, which is great. So my daughter feels her feelings, or the three feels their feelings, and then because they're so focused on doing and being the best in the world, that whatever they're doing they want to be the best at, they have to put their feelings aside because the feelings would get in the way of them being the best. So they forget about them. And they'll come back to them later, and they'll deal with them on their own time in their own way, but they don't do them in the moment. And then for the romantic, internalizes their feelings. So the romantic is a really beautiful part of the Enneagram because they're very focused on being unique and different. They feel their feelings intensely, and they tend to be the ones who, because they feel so deeply, they tend to be the artists, the musicians, because they can bring all of that emotion out into their work. They have a beautiful aesthetic. They really bring beauty to our lives. So then on the last side, we go to the head or fear triad. And these are, again, people here, the 5, the observer. So the 5 internalizes it. So the 5 will remove him or herself to look at their feelings, but they feel the feeling and then they think about how to deal with the feeling rather than actually feeling the feeling. So they're very sensitive, don't get me wrong. We all just have a strategy, and we have all of these parts too, but we will have repressed some because it didn't serve us as children, and we will have expressed others. And so we learn to do what works for us. So the 6 is actually one of the interesting types on the Enneagram. They are both phobic and counterphobic. They're focused on fear. And the phobic 6 does a lot of what ifs. So they tend to be very anxious because they're trying to figure out, they see everything in terms of what could go wrong. And then they're trying to plan for how to avoid that. And they're really lovely, like everyone's really lovely. The counterphobic knows they're afraid, but they look like they never are afraid because they just move right into their fear and they overcome their fear. That's what their goal is. And then the 7 is a really joyful personality on the Enneagram, and they tend to focus on the good parts. So they like to be positive, happy, and joyful, loving, and they're really fun and adventurous. But they tend not to want to look at the dark side, the challenging emotions. So they forget about those to the best of their ability. So that's that. And then underneath that, or around that, are 3 other types of instincts. So there's a self-preservation instinct, and that type of instinct, so we all kind of, you can see the layers that start to show up, right? So we have a type, we've got wings, we've got secure and stress, and then we've, depending upon where we are in the triads, and then we've got the self-preservation, which is about safety, comfort, and health of the physical body and making sure I have enough resources. And if that's my focus, then the way I go about being in the world is going to be, my motivation will be focused along those lines. There's a sexual instinct, which doesn't mean necessarily the act. It's more about the chemistry, and they know who they are immediately connected to and who they're not. And then there's a social instinct, and the social instinct is very much aware of what is expected of them. and they can feel what other people need and don't effectively, and how they're supposed to be to make everything around them, their environment, the people around them, work. Any questions so far? I know that's a lot of information. Yes?
Sorry, I think I missed the challenger.
Oh, yes, thank you. So the challenger is, you'll know when you, if you come across the challenger, the 8. So challengers are, when it comes to anger and personality, challengers are big personalities. They don't want to be controlled. They're afraid of being betrayed. And so when they come into a room, they are all about, they're very passionate, and if they're unhappy with something, they're going to let you know. So their anger comes out instantly. It's very intense. You know they're mad, and most of us can't handle the degree of the intensity around their anger, but they hang on to nothing. So when they're mad, they let it go, it's done, and that's over with. But they're very direct, and if they don't like something, they're going to let you know. So they externalize their anger. And like I said, it can be hard for... So I grew up with... the fun part is we will know all of these people. And again, for me, this type, growing up with it was very difficult for me. And I think I just have learned how to deal with that in the last 10 years. Right? Where it's, oh, I get what's going on here. And the anger is protection, because every one of us is really sensitive, and we have a tough time with our vulnerable parts if we don't know how to express the vulnerability in a way that takes care of us. Right? That vulnerability feels just too much. And so the 8 protects it with anger. Okay? So that's lots of talking. So now I'd like to get you guys to just look at your type. Okay, so I'm going to hand out this. So we're just going to figure out what your type is if you don't know. Does anyone not want to do this in case you may already know your type and you don't want to look at it? So what we're going to do is, this is a little quick personality profile. It's the first one I did. Okay, it comes from the Essential Enneagram. And basically what you're going to do is there are 9 paragraphs. Okay? 9 paragraphs for you to read, and you'll see in the middle of the first page, there are alphabet, 3 choices, 3 rows of alphabet. Everyone see it? Okay, great. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through and read the 9 paragraphs, and you're going to find the 3 that are most like you. And you're going to look at those 3 and go, okay, this one is the most like me, and that's going to be choice 1. Second most like you is 2, and the third is 3. Okay, so when you read them, just circle the ones, the paragraph letter that most feels like you, the 3 most that feel like you. And I just want to say, and it will say this in the instructions, that it's not about like individual sentences or phrases or words. It's about the overall feel of the paragraph. Does that feel like you or not? And because remember, we have all of the types, but we want to find the ones that feel most like you. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to give you some time to read. And okay, everyone ready to start? So, how many of you think you found your type? Woohoo! Okay, Terry, not sure. Judith, you knew. Pam, did you find yours? Okay. Yes?
Well, I have 3, and that could be, and they aren't, they could be any order.
Okay, so no particular one jumped out?
No, not of the 3. They're all
Okay. So, at the bottom of the last page is a legend.
Yeah,
so
I
if you
saw
just
that.
okay, so if you just pay attention to your 3, And I'm going to explain something here in a second. Everyone else, where is everyone else at? Did you guys find yours, do you think?
Oh, weird. Yeah, mine line up with the link.
Aha. Okay, so generally that's what's going to happen is when you find that you've got the 3 and it's really difficult to determine which of those 3 is your top, then chances are it's either a wing or it's a stress or security point for you. So you know yourself in those places. That can often happen. Okay, so you listen, and it can be challenging depending upon how you're feeling. So some people may be unhappy for a long time, so they think they're their stress type, not their actual type. That's why it really comes down to motivation. So I'm gonna challenge you guys a little bit, okay? So I've brought some stones, and I want to see if you can guess which type I am. Okay? So we're gonna go through the types right now and just summarize them quickly as we can, because there's lots to each type. So we're going to do the high-level summaries. I'm going to get a little bit of help. And if there's anyone who knows their type and is open to reading, so it's not just me, then that would be great too. Okay? And I'm happy to take questions along the way. So I'm actually going to start with the 8. I'm going to start with the 8 here, and we're going to work through the gut triad. Okay? So as we shared, the 8's motivation is they have a passion for being in charge of their lives. So they do not want to be controlled. And so that will show up in lots of different ways. And it's intense because, like I said, they will fill a room. I find that lots of times they have big voices, they take up their space. Whatever space belongs to them, they don't shy away from owning that space. We've talked about the triad. Their unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to be vulnerable or to trust someone. They only trust themselves. They're afraid of their vulnerability. They don't want to be controlled. They have a very soft, tender side that rarely gets exposed. But when it does, it feels very vulnerable and it's very challenging for them. At their best, they're direct, authoritative, loyal, energetic, earthy, protective, and self-confidence. At their worst, they're controlling, rebellious, insensitive, domineering, self-centered, skeptical, and aggressive. Their passion is lust. They lust after intensity. Okay? So they're the enthusiastic ones on the Enneagram. They have a lust for everything. They want it to be intense. They want to feel it. They want to experience it. And that's why they have lust. Their virtue is innocence. So when they move into their vulnerability, they really connect with their tender side, and they're often for the underdog. So they can see the people who are struggling, who need help, and they have the ability and the strength to help them. In their 9 wing, they tend to be more mild-mannered, gentle, receptive, and quietly strong over here. Okay? So when they go into 9, it's less loud. When they go into 7, they tend to be more introverted, enterprising. Yes?
Can you relate those to the letters? You're using numbers.
Yeah, so if you go to the bottom, sorry.
I realize that, but I'm going back and forth trying to decide whether you're describing, for instance, A at first.
So A is the 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's make the numbers and letters interchangeable. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very bottom of page 3, you'll see the numbers interchangeable with the letters. So thanks for bringing that up. That is good.
So you're saying the wings.
So these are so there's the 8, and the wings are going to be to the either side of it.
Not the triad.
No, we're going to get to the triad. These are the triads, the gut. So the green, all of these are in the gut triad or the body triad. So they feel in their bodies. They can feel the sensations, and that moves. Here it's the feelings, so they're more of a heart-centered. And these three will do, they act. They act first rather than feel first. And here, these people think first. Okay, that's how they work. Okay?
What are the lines that connect to each one?
So the challenger, when they're in a secure point, they go into 2. So they become more generous, they're more fun, they're more loving, they're playful, and they're more accepting here. And then when they're in a stress point, they go into 5, the observer. And in 5, they're combative, they're possessive, they're quick to find fault, and they will deny all their feelings so they can work harder. Their orientation to time is future. Okay, I see lots of you kind of looking like you're. Any questions? Because I know this is a lot to take in, and maybe it's almost too much to take in. Yes.
So the 3 that I've chosen, they don't all line up.
Which is okay.
Okay, so I've got 7 and 1 line up, and 8 is a shoulder. Can that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all works. You just have to determine which is your most dominant type. And so when you listen to this, and you listen for what's the motivation, see if any of the motivations jump out at you. Okay? That say, oh, I respond this way. So chances are it's not an 8, but you may be a 7 with an 8 wing, or you may be a 1. And when you listen to the motivations for each of those, let's see if anything makes more sense. Okay? Okay? So their orientation to time is the future. The 8s are all about doing and taking care of things for the future. So they get to work, they work hard, they have a huge amount of energy, they have the most amount of energy on this Enneagram. So their stance, so we all have a position, our bodies show up, and in all of the patterns that we have, our bodies show up in a way we stand and our stance in the world. 8s are aggressive. Okay, they're happy to be in charge of others, and they are seen to be standing independently and sometimes against others. They're authentic. They don't like honesty when it comes at them. They're happy to be honest with you. But when you are honest with them, even though they might not like it, they do respect it. So I'm not going to go into any more than that because I think that's a lot. Okay, I have more. If you want more, you can have more later. So moving into the 9. The 9 motivation is being in harmony with others, okay, and their environment. They avoid conflict. They go along to get along. Okay, it's really important to them. They, like I said before, they can see all sides of a situation, so it's hard for them to decide what to do. I told you they avoid everything. They do everything they can to avoid conflict, and we need those people, right? We need people who can show us how to be in harmony. And we need people how to show us how to be enthusiastic for life, how to deal head on with conflict. And that's what the 8 does. So 9, there's a nice balance there if those 2 can kind of work together and recognize their types. So as I said too, they fear fracturing their relationships because they're important. And their anger's forgotten. They have the passion of sloth or indolence. Okay? So, and the reason they have that is because they forget themselves. They kind of get lazy to who they are and what they are about. So they merge with others, they give themselves up to others, and they, in conversations with them, if they are not aware, they will merge with you to the point where you feel really seen and heard because you feel like, well, we're on the same page. But they're giving up themselves until they go away from you. They don't really know what they're thinking or feeling. They need to be away by themselves. So as they develop awareness, that changes. Their virtue is action. So you can see the 3, when they're stressed, they move into 6, and their virtue comes out in 3 when they move into action. When they're stressed, they're withdrawn and uncommunicative, and there's nothing, you can't coerce them. If they are in a stress place, you can't coerce them out of their way of being. They need time. You can't have a confrontation with them. If they're not ready, they will not talk to you. That's generally how they are. And the more aware they are, the more they're willing to engage in conflict. But it takes time. And their time can be a good thing as well. So with the one wing, they tend to be more orderly, critical, emotionally controlled, and compliant. And with the 8, they tend to be more outgoing, assertive, and authoritative. How do you say that word?
Authoritative.
Authoritative, thank you. And they may waffle between being confrontational and conciliatory when they're in 8. So, and again, I've worked with some of those, and it's really fun to see how much you can shift in that place. Their orientation to time is the past, and what's beautiful about that is they don't feel like they have to worry about conflict, because every conflict in the past is worked out for them. That's sort of how they view life. So they don't really think about the future. Their orientation is to the past, and their stance is they withdraw. They'll move away from the conflict. They'll move away from the people that they are afraid of fracturing a relationship. People are drawn to them. They're really easygoing and easy to get along with. They are the least... They don't have a ton of energy because they're spending tons of energy maintaining their boundaries around conflict and making sure their environment internally and externally is harmonious. They're the least controlling of all the types. So Monica, would you be open to sharing about one?
Yeah, sure.
I asked Monica to share about one. Did I mention one other thing? So as we go through all of this, did I say that if you guys can guess what type I am?
Yes.
Okay, good. Can you tell I've been talking too much?
Do you want me to come
You can, sure.
to your side?
Yes. Come on up.
So
If you're
that you
comfortable
can
with that.
Probably support me a little bit with
Sure.
the virtual thing. And so I'm a type 1, and my motivation is being organized and perfect in every way. And that's so true. And we talked about my culture also. So I'm German, and my whole family was like this. I don't know anything but perfectionism. So the type goes very well with a total collective consciousness that's behind me, my ancestors and everything. I try to be perfect in thought, word, and deed. So the other Enneagram book called me the Reformer, and it's the only type that believes that every step needs to be done very, very well. And I'm really the type who gives the best in everything I do. And so my thing is gut and anger. I'm very grateful to the gut thing because it makes me intuitive in my counseling work. The anger, I have to admit, is sometimes not so good because it's often directed against myself because I'm making mistakes. How can I make mistakes? Right? So it's, there is this anger. Then it's very interesting. The unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to make mistakes. And this was not just an unconscious childhood message, but also the message that I got from my parents all the time. And the fear of being bad also was supported by my parents because they said, I am bad. I am a sinner. I have to go to confession in church and all that stuff. I am no, that's okay. I'm through that. I am ethical, especially in my work. I find this again and again, and I just mentioned it today again at the workplace I work. It's privacy and being ethical is really very high, and also honesty and fairness. I'm self-disciplined, and as then comes the worst. So my shadow is being judgmental. Because I'm so perfect, how can anybody else not be perfect? Right?
That's so true.
Sometimes that comes through in being judgmental and saying, no, that's not right. And then I'm critical against myself, and then of course I'm criticizing others too. And I'm overly serious sometimes, that's so true also. What's also very true is I need to perfect the world. Oh, will I ever do this in my lifetime? I'm not sure. When I take on too much responsibility, which I sometimes do, I get angry. That's true also.
And do you get resentful when you take on too much responsibility? So the
resentful, I'm not really. This English word doesn't feel like I would know exactly what it means.
So it's basically when it's small sparks of anger that are starting to build. So what's a good way to describe resentment? So it can be this. What was that?
When you hold something against someone.
There. That's one way to. So if something happens that hasn't been done perfectly, it's like you'll notice it, the judgment, and then you'll build a small anger that.
Oh yes, yeah. I do. It's a funny example is sometimes when I'm in the kitchen at the SOS, I fold the towels and I put them in the drawer. And sometimes of course, I only work there 3 days, so I'm not always there. Damn it! So somebody else does it sometimes. And they are throwing those things in, and they are not folding them correctly. Yes, it makes me angry. And the funny thing once was that a colleague did it next to me, so she did not fold it correct, like corner to corner, and put it in, and I took it. And she was looking at me, and she said, "What's going on here?" And I said, "I'm perfect." So it's true. But meanwhile, I can laugh about it because I know myself. And I really can say that my two wings, I'm pretty balanced meanwhile in my two wings. So I love this harmony, and I can be more relaxed, whereas when I was younger, I had to constantly do something, and you cannot just sit there and enjoy the weather or something. You have to do something. And with wing 2, I also tend to, after seeing that somebody doesn't fold the towels right, I forgive. So what else is there? Yeah, when I get kicked into stress when I'm suddenly doing things that I cannot control. That's true too. But meanwhile I can relax more and feel more secure in situations than in the past, if this makes sense.
Yeah.
The orientation to time is present, and that's so totally right as well, because I forget about time, and I don't often know the date or anything. It's just I want to be in the present. And
then I just want to point out that the stance is dependent. So that means that people that are in the dependent stance basically rely on other people to they move towards other people because other people show them what needs to be done effectively, right? There is that sense of, how do I describe it? So it's not about the future or the past, it's more about what needs to be done now, and it can be dependent on what shows up around them. Is that- yeah.
That's true.
Okay, that's awesome.
The last thing is I love deeply and do all that I can to protect and care for those I care about. So that's absolutely true.
Lovely.
Also for my profession.
Thank you, Monica.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So how's everyone doing? I really recognize this is a lot. Are you guys doing okay? Yeah. Okay, and how are we doing for time? 8:08. Okay, I'm going to go fast. Okay, and so the two is the giver, and the two is, we've talked about briefly, their motivation is in giving and receiving love. They are so engrossed in knowing the other person that they lose themselves. They can sense what other people aren't saying. They're really cool. That's really cool in my mind. I think I would have liked to have been a 2, a healthy 2. So their unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to have your own needs. So they believe that by taking care of other people's needs, their needs would be taken care of. They have a fear of not being worthy of being loved, and they're afraid no one will be available to help them when they need help. So they do lots of things. They're very generous and giving in the hopes that because they're generous and giving, that the people they're giving to are going to give to them when they need help. Sometimes that's spoken and direct, but mostly it isn't. They're at their best, they're loving, caring, adaptable, insightful, generous, enthusiastic, and tuned into how people feel. At their worst, they're indirect, manipulative, possessive, hysterical, overly accommodating, and overly demonstrative. So their passion is pride, okay, and most of the time, 2s will not know that they have a passion or a sin of pride, however you want to call it, because they feel so much and they're giving so much to other people, they can't possibly, they think there's nothing to be proud of. But the pride is actually in the fact that they're doing so much for other people that they miss that they're actually proud of that, if that makes sense. Their virtue is humility. So when they can move into humility and realize how they're giving and receiving, and it's more balanced, then it has more humility. So when they move into their one wing, they move into either 2 or 3. In 1, they're idealistic. They can be self-critical and judgmental, but they can also be objective. And in 3, they're self-assured, ambitious, outgoing, and competitive. Okay, and they can be great salespeople. And in the books there's lots of beautiful things. And remember, there's lots of beautiful things and difficult things about all of us, and we need all of the types. In stress, they move into 8, and I've worked with a 2, and it was lovely for me, because when everyone is around her or him and they're scared of that anger, I know exactly that person's needs are not being met. And so it's just then they may not be able to reach out and say, hey, I need some help here. So when they're in stress, they're controlling, possessive, they take on sort of some of the 8, and they can choose to move into the negative or healthy parts of the 8. When they go into security, so they move into 4, they go from 2 to 4, they are accepting and they have more access to their own feelings. So it kind of slows them down a bit, and they question how much they're giving. So the 2s are the type that will give and give and give, and they love it, but kind of like the one, they'll do too much giving, and then all of a sudden they don't have anything left for themselves, and they've overcommitted. And then the people that they've overcommitted to, their family doesn't always get the resources because they're tired. And when they overgive at the end, the people that it's kind of like they are sunshine. When that sunshine is removed, it's like, what happened? All of a sudden, because it can be very black and white feeling almost. So it can be a bit hard to take. Okay, type 3, the achiever. So with the 2 and the 4 wing, their motivation is to get things done and to be the best. They want to be recognized for their achievements. And we actually in this North American society have a lot of 3 type energy. We are all about work, work, work. And so for lots of companies, 3s are really great, but overall, it's an energy that, if it does too much, doesn't take care of itself. Their unconscious childhood message is, it's not okay to have your own feelings and identity. And as a mother with all this awareness, I've been calling my daughter and going, did I do that to you? So their fears of not being successful. So if a 3 is the least, how to say that? It's the saddest number when they don't achieve success, because it's just so challenging for them. So at their best, they're optimistic, confident, industrious, efficient, self-propelled, energetic, and practical. At their worst, they're deceptive, narcissistic, pretentious, vain, superficial, vindictive, and overly competitive. Their passion is deceit, and what they do is they're very image conscious. So 3s can read a room. They know what you need, how you need them to show up, and they will present in that way. So they're also called performers because they know how to perform for you. And in doing that, they lose themselves. So they're very good at managing their image. And their virtue is basically its veracity. So they, and their energy is a charismatic producer. I'm sorry, I'm starting to go kind of fast, but I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. So their 2-wing, they tend to be warmer, more encouraging, sociable, popular, and seductive. In 4, they tend to be introspective, sensitive, artistic, imaginative, and pretentious. In stress, they procrastinate, and they move into 9, and they become self-forgetting. They can overindulge, and by self-forgetting, they can start to eat too much and forget to go to the gym and do things that they just lose their sense of care. And in the in the security, they go into 6, and in 6 they slow down and they lose their sense of sureness. So they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know why they're doing it. So they start to question things. Their orientation to time is the future. So it's quite kind of interesting. So you've got people who may disconnect from each other because they just don't get, my daughter lives in the future, and it's like, well, why do you have a tough time getting that done? Because just do it. That's her level of thinking. And my husband's in the past, right? And I'm in the present, so it gets a little confusing. Her stance is aggressive. You wouldn't really notice that all that much with this, but 3s know what they want, and they go after it. So, type 4, the romantic, their motivation is they want to be different. They want to be seen as unique, and they want to make a deep and lasting difference. They don't like to have surface conversations. They want to do things that matter. They want to be known for who they really are, and they find that most people don't take the time to know them. Their unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to be too functional or too happy. So they tend to be more melancholic. At their best, they're warm, compassionate, introspective, intuitive, creative, supportive, and refined. And at their worst, they're depressed, self-conscious, guilt-ridden, moralistic, stubborn, and moody. They have a fear of fitting in and losing their uniqueness in the process. So they don't want to fit in, and they don't want to lose themselves. And when they adapt to situations where they feel like they have to fit in, that's horrible for them, and they feel like they're selling out. Their passion is envy because they feel like they're missing something. So when they look around and they see people who look like their lives are figured out and that they're happy, they want the happiness that other people have. So they're not looking for materialistic things, but they just want the feeling of security and happiness. In the 5, when they move the 5 wing or the 3 wing, both are actually interesting for the 4. They tend to be introverted, intellectual, idiosyncratic, and reserved and depressed in 5. And then in 3, they tend to be more extroverted, upbeat, ambitious, and image conscious. In stress, the 4 moves to 2, and they become self-indulgent, they're attached to being different, and they may be unavailable, hoping you'll pursue them. Right? There's that sense of wanting that bit. And when they're in security, they move into 1, and they sort of see the perfection. They can see the perfection of all things. They're more productive, creative, and they experience their feelings more. Their orientation to time is the past, and they really fear abandonment. And their stance is withdrawn, so they move away from people. And don't ever tell a 4 they're too much. That's incredibly hurtful for them. Just saying.
What do you mean don't tell them they're too much?
Well, sometimes, you can come across some people, and I heard a story of a mother who had a 4 child, and the child wasn't fitting in, and it was very difficult for the mother to watch. And so she basically said to the child, well, maybe you could try being more normal. And that is the worst thing to say to someone who's trying really hard to be unique and needs people to see their uniqueness, the beauty of their uniqueness. Type 5, the observer, they're looking for and finding the answers. They're interested in seeking knowledge. That is their motivation. That is my husband to a T. The unconscious childhood message for a 5 is it's not okay to be comfortable in the world. At their best, they're analytical, preserving, sensitive, wise, perceptive, and self-contained. They're very sensitive. At his worst, or at their worst, shouldn't say that, they're arrogant, stingy, stubborn, distant, critical, unassertive, and negative. They have a fear of being useless, incapable, or incompetent. Definitely. Their passion is avarice. So if you saw a 5, generally you wouldn't think that avarice would belong to them. But avarice, a sort of greed.
Oh, okay.
And 5s tend to hoard things. Okay, they're hoarding knowledge and information and resources because they don't ever want to, they want to feel like they can live independently. They want to be able to take care of their own needs. So if you come to my house, we'll have, there are things that my husband feels like he will need at some point. We don't know exactly when, but he also works really hard, and again, there's the levels of awareness. So he is more aware, so he lets go of things. He can see that pattern coming out and realizing that he doesn't need to hang on to things. So with a 4 wing, they're creative, humanistic, sensitive, empathic, and can be somewhat self-absorbed. 4s can be self-absorbed. And in 6, loyal, anxious, skeptical, and cautious. When he goes into stress, this is a very odd move. He goes into the 7, which is a really happy, adventurous, joyful place. But 5s are very introverted, and they're very uncomfortable in social situations. So when a 5 goes into the 7 social situation, they can look like they're having fun, but it's very difficult for them. They would prefer you not ask them to go to most social circumstances. And they look very uncomfortable, at least the ones I know. When he's in a good place, he goes to 8, and he becomes a little bit more self-assured. He comes out of his man cave more, and he's very decisive. His orientation to time is the past, and I asked him about that. He said he thought he was future-oriented, but he thinks about all the things that went wrong in the past to make sure they don't happen in the future.
Karen, what trips people in and out of, you're saying you're going to 8, what trips and causes people to switch personality?
Great question. So what happens is, effectively, if you have a stressful situation, whoever we are, when we're stressed or we're uncomfortable, then we can move into whatever our stress place is, okay? And again, we can see ourselves moving into that place, and we can pick either the healthy level or average or unhealthy level of that type. So, and then when we're in a good place, we feel happy, joyful, right? Something good is happening in our world, so we can move into the secure place.
So are you saying that stress is the determiner, or a degree of stress that pushes from one place to another?
Generally, yeah.
Thank you.
So, me being stressed, thinking about this, I would have been in a different place. And I can see my patterns as I move in and out of those. And I'll share more later. Does that answer your question?
Makes sense.
Yeah. And he withdraws and moves away from others. He needs lots of time alone to process things. And he has 5s have a limited amount of energy every day. So they wake up with the same amount of energy. And when that energy is used up, there is nothing you can do. And my experience of, I'm a worker, so I know, like, I could go on and on, but when my husband is done, there is nothing I can do to make him work harder, longer. It just doesn't happen. So again, more learning for me. So we have 2 left. How are we doing for time? I don't want to keep you. We have 5 minutes left. How's everyone doing?
We still haven't guessed who you are.
Okay, well, you're going to guess in a couple minutes. So I'll do 6 quickly. So the 6 is, their motivation is looking out for others, being proactive and prepared. Okay, their unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to trust yourself. They have a fear of failure and being without support or guidance. Okay? At their best, they're loyal, likable, caring, warm, compassionate, witty, helpful, and responsible. And at their worst, they're hypervigilant, controlling, unpredictable, judgmental, paranoid, rigid, self-defeating, and testy.
Wow.
Yeah. Counterphobic, they deal with their fears head-on, as I said, and phobic, they get into what-if thinking. Their passion is fear or doubt, and they see worst-case scenarios, doubt themselves, so give power away to others, generally authority figures. Their virtue is courage, so when they have the courage to step into whatever it is they're afraid of and to follow through, they can sometimes get into a loop where they can figure out in their minds what they need to do, so they want to take action, they'll go to take action, and then they'll doubt themselves. They'll step back and go, oh, I'm afraid of making a mistake, so they won't follow through. And then the loop continues. So and it creates anxiety. So it's really hard for them. But with a 5 wing, they tend to be more introverted, intellectual, cautious, and standoffish. With the 7 wing, they tend to be more extroverted, materialistic, active, and impulsive. In stress, the 6 goes to 3, so they'll look really busy and they'll get lots done. but they actually are stressed, and it's a way to avoid the feelings. So if they know what they need to do, they will do them, but it will cost them. And then when they're in a secure place, they move into 9. And in 9, they feel on top of things because they feel like things have sort of settled. They're less kind of judgmental. They're less controlling. And they're really lovely to be around. They're very supportive and helpful. And their orientation to time is the present. So you have 1, 2, and 6 that are present oriented. And so his stance is also dependent. So that type is concerned with others' expectations and move towards others, and they're loyal and dependable, right? So they'll move towards what do people need? How can they support? That's what they do. And they're lovely too. All of them are lovely. They're concerned about the common good. They like structure rather than chaos. Barbara? Barbara's going to read 7 for us. And then that's it. We're going to end with Barbara.
Number 7, motivation, engaging in a lot of different activities and having fun.
Woohoo!
I can feel that. The triad is don't like fear types, think about ways to avoid feeling pain. And I also do that. And my unconscious childhood message is it's not okay to depend on anyone for anything. And I used to think that came from something must have happened to me and I didn't trust someone, and so that's the way I got. But I guess I was born with it. Fear of being deprived and trapped in pain. And my best is fun-loving, spontaneous, imaginative, productive, enthusiastic, quick, confident, charming, and curious. My worst is narcissistic, and I've got some underlined. Mine is impulsive, unfocused, rebellious, undisciplined, possessive, manic, self-destructive, and restless. My emotion, fear of being forgotten.
Well, your fear is, so we're in the triad, the thinking type is forgotten, right? So the fear is forgotten.
Okay.
It's hard for 7s to look at the fear.
Mm-hmm. I avoided
right?
it. No
you
cost.
avoid it, exactly.
Manage fear, manage fear by diffusing it, wanting to be happy and avoid pain or painful situations. Must never look like they are afraid, and are afraid of seeing so positive. What does that mean? They are afraid as seemed so positive.
Well, they don't want to look like they're afraid because they always look so
that's
positive, right?
Okay.
So they definitely show that side.
Now, my passion is gluttony, gorge themselves on adventure and distractions to avoid painful feelings. And although my weight doesn't look like it, I actually do love chocolate.
Lucky.
Yeah, it works for me.
It obviously does.
Routine is a drag, and that's probably one of my, I don't know if I call it important or my downfall. I do not like routine at all, and I go out of my way to avoid routine. Constant
That's so
desire
great.
for more. Fill themselves with positive, stimulating experiences. Love for life to be full of variety and fun and joy. Virtue, sobriety. Now, I consider sobriety to be very composed, and I don't see myself as being composed.
Okay. So sobriety means for me that you're going to step back and look at what you're taking in.
Okay.
So it's that level of control around the gluttony.
Okay, I can take that. Energy, airy, excitement. My 6th wing, loyal, enduring, responsible, and anxious.
Yeah, so love it. Yeah, that's your 6th wing, right? Yeah.
And my 8th wing, exuberant, aggressive, competitive, and materialistic. Now, I used to be more of those than I am now.
Okay, and that's the beautiful part as we age, those can soften.
Stress, cynical, hypercritical, judgmental, want to change people, Feel a low-level irritability.
Moves to 1, perfectionist.
Yeah, and I do feel more irritability about myself more than other people.
Well, and it will, so what I notice, it will start with the 7, right? You'll start with judging yourself, and then it will also go out towards other people. That's what ones tend to do.
Security, detached and more accepting of all of life.
Move to 5.
Move to 5?
Yeah, so in security, they move to 5. So there's more detachment.
Okay. Become more serious and get in touch with their fears, which I'm learning to do. Orientation in time, future, and I agree with that. Stance, aggressive, having to be in charge of others, seen as standing independently, and sometimes against others. I have always stood independently. I can see where that's coming from. Okay, that's it?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so what do you think?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Understand yourself better.
It sure does. So now, what type do you think I am?
Or you're a 1, 2, or a 6.
Because she's listening. She's paying attention to the...
I know that, but I can't narrow it down. Maybe a 6.
Okay, anyone guess?
1 or an 8.
Okay, good. So you two, you've both got it in your... So what is it?
It's a 1.
There you go. So you get 1?
Yep.
Just for fun.
Right.
It's a stone. It's a crystal. And you get 1.
Thank you.
And what's your name?
Ron,
Hi, Ron. Thank
you
you.
relieve me. I'm speaking next month. so-
Okay, great.
What's it?
Oh, it's
in the
just a,
back?
it's just a rock. It's a stone.
Okay.
So, thank you so much for coming. Any other questions?
Would you mind if we could all that out? Have you been studying it?
I went on the
She-
computer and filled in the book.
Okay.
But they confirmed it because I read it. Prepared. I'm prepared.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you did so informative.
Good.
And it was wonderful.
Good, I'm glad. So, thank you so much for having me.